Welcome to the fifth in a series of conversations about teaching with teachers. This is Peter Finn, head of St Mary's University College in Belfast, and the conversations are one of a strand of our Teaching Profession project, which has the theme of We Have Something to Say. Today I am pleased to introduce three former teachers who have held significant leadership roles in the education system here in Northern Ireland during their careers. To my right is Anne-Marie Duffy, has over 40 years working with the education sector, most recently as Director of Qualifications with SIA. Then to my left is Carmel McCartan, who has worked in St Louise's Comprehensive College here in the Falls Road for 37 years, where she was a successful principal. And Jerry Devlin, who has worked for 42 years in the education service and recently retired as Senior Education Officer with the General Teaching Council for Northern Ireland. So that's almost 120 years of service to education in Northern Ireland between my three colleagues. Our conversation today is about the climate and biodiversity crisis that the world is experiencing. It will be facilitated through the lens of Laudato Si, a papal encyclical outlining the views of Pope Francis on this most important matter for mankind. So, to start things off, Anne-Marie will tell us more about Laudato Si and its key messages.
As you have already said, Peter, Laudato Si is an encyclical written by Pope Francis. It was written in 2015 and it has been described as a love poem to the planet. Professor John Barry, Professor of Green Political Economy at Queen's University, says that Laudato Si is the one thing that would bring him back to the Catholic faith. Now that's an extremely powerful message. In essence, it's a series of reflections, considerations and suggested actions on care for our common home, the earth environment on which we are all so dependent, so that humanity can thrive and that our grandchildren can enjoy a fulfilling life in harmony not only with nature, but also with their fellow brothers and sisters throughout the world. It challenges us as people of faith and no faith to open our eyes to a new way of living, and in that sense the encyclical is ecumenical in focus and counter-cultural in approach. This inclusivity is acknowledged over and over again, and the call for both social and ecological justice is also reinforced throughout. Pope Francis says that nothing in this world is indifferent to us. We are all united by the same concerns, and he makes an urgent appeal for a new dialogue, a conversation that includes everyone, so that each of us can cooperate as instruments of God for the care of creation, each of us according to our own culture, experience, involvement and talents. The urgent challenge to protect our common home includes a concern to bring the whole human family together to seek a sustainable and integral development. One of the strongest messages in the encyclical is the idea of integral ecology, and Pope Francis shows how inseparable the bond is between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society and interior peace. He outlines his belief that rather than a problem to be solved, the world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise. Throughout, Pope Francis believes that change can happen, and at the end we are left with hope and a belief that each of us can be that agent of change. Young people demand change. They wonder how anyone can claim to be building a better future without thinking of the environmental crisis and the suffering of the excluded. Young people must see the conviction of their elders in walking the talk, living out our faith in an authentic manner. The encyclical begins by reviewing aspects of the present ecological crisis, drawing upon scientific research around pollution and climate change, waste and throwaway culture, which has been exacerbated by the intensified pace of life and work, a process referred to as rapidification, and I know that Jerry has views on this. In fact, Pope Francis states that the earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. Quite strong and frank language for a pope, I think. He is scathing in his comments on weak international political responses, saying that the most one can expect is superficial rhetoric, sporadic ads of philanthropy, and perfunctory expressions of concern. Pope Francis then considers some principles drawn from the Judeo-Christian tradition, which he advocates can render our commitment to the environment more coherent. Faith gives us the motivation to care for nature and for the most vulnerable of our brothers and sisters. He states that in a universal communion, everything is related, woven together by the love God has for each of his creatures, and which also unites us in fond affection with brother sun, sister moon, brother river, and mother earth. God created the earth for everyone. The rich and poor have equal dignity, for the Lord is the maker of them all. This is followed by a consideration of roots and causes of the present situation, which he sees largely as a result of the negative effects of technology, where technology products create a framework which conditions lifestyles and shapes social possibilities along the lines dictated by the interests of certain powerful groups. He states the economy accepts every advance in technology with a view to profit, without concern for its potentially negative impact on human beings. He then advances some broader proposals for dialogue and action based upon the conviction that our planet is our homeland and that humanity is one people living in a common home. He argues that interdependence obliges us to think of one world with a common plan, and that solutions need to be proposed from a global perspective, but that we each need to play our role also at local and community level. Pope Francis exhibits a realism when he states that in taking up the costs that actions entail, politicians will inevitably clash with the mindset of short-term gain and results which dominate present-day economics and politics. But if they are courageous, they will attest to their God-given dignity and leave behind a testimony of selfless responsibility, which is a direct quote from Pope Francis. He also says that a healthy politics is sorely needed. He goes on to add that even the best mechanisms can break down when there are no worthy goals or values or a genuine and profound humanism to serve as the basis of a noble and generous society. Carmel will elaborate on this further, I know, in the context of teaching and learning. Technologically more advanced societies must encourage more sober lifestyles, according to Pope Francis. The encyclical finishes with offering some guidelines towards a new lifestyle, a turning away from compulsive consumerism, recognising that purchasing is always a moral and not just simply an economic act. The moral imperative of assessing the impact of our every action and personal decision on the world around us. Human development from the Christian spiritual experience provides both the motivation for this new lifestyle and highlights the need for a process of education. Pope Francis states that young people have grown up in the milieu of excessive consumerism and affluence, which makes it difficult to develop other habits. We are therefore faced with an educational challenge. He states that educators need to be capable of developing an ethos of ecology and helping people through effective pedagogy to grow in solidarity, responsibility, and compassionate care. Pope Francis states that the relationship between a good aesthetic education and the maintenance of a healthy environment cannot be overlooked. By learning to see and appreciate beauty, we learn to reject self-interested pragmatism. He advocates an ecological spirituality grounded in the convictions of our faith, since the teachings of the gospel have direct consequences for our way of thinking, feeling, and loving. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional nor a secondary aspect of our Christian experience. We need to experience a conversion, a change of heart, recognising our errors and promoting a desire to change. This conversion calls for gratitude, recognition that the world is God's gift. We are connected and joined in universal communion with the creatures of the earth. We need to take up the ancient lesson found in different traditions that less is more, a return to simplicity which allows us to stop and appreciate the small things, to be grateful for the opportunities which life affords us, to be spiritually detached from what we possess, and not to succumb to sadness for what we lack. Pope Francis says that such sobriety, when lived freely and consciously, is liberating. Inner peace is closely related to care for ecology and for the common good, because lived out authentically in a balanced lifestyle, together with a capacity for wonder, takes us to a deeper understanding of life. An attitude of the heart is highlighted, and one expression of this, he says, is simply to stop and give thanks before and after meals. In conclusion, we must regain the conviction that we need one another, that we have a shared responsibility for others, and that the world and that being good and decent are worth it. St. Therese of Lisieux talks about practicing the little ways of love, not to miss out on a kind word, a smile, or any gesture which sows peace and friendship. Community actions, when they express self-giving love, can also become intense spiritual experiences. Let we sing as we go. May our struggles and concern for this planet never take away the joy of our hope. And that is the message within Laudato Si. In terms of structure, the encyclical is divided into a number of chapters, 6 in total, each comprising subsections and numbered paragraphs, which makes it a very accessible read. The language is frank and forthright, with no ambiguity, and gives us, I think, as people of faith, no place to hide. It challenges us to our very core. What is the legacy that we wish to leave to those who may come after us? What type of a world do we wish to live in now and create for the future? How does faith enter into our daily actions? Pope Francis is not afraid to state where and what he sees as the causes of the problem we face from both an ecological and social justice perspective. He's not either shy in calling out the inadequacy of international responses, which he sees as inadequate due to vested interest, expediency, and mindset of short-term gain. As examples of this frank and forthright language, he talks about a healthy politics being sorely needed and the earth beginning to look like an immense pile of filth. In other places, the language is almost poetic. For example, drawing from St. Francis of Assisi, "Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruit with coloured flowers and herbs." He commends positive action and praises the commitments of others, such as civil society organisations who draw public attention to issues, and he cites positive examples of environmental improvement. He particularly mentions the young, who he says have a new ecological sensitivity and a generous spirit, and some of whom are making admirable efforts to protect the environment, and one only has to think of young people like Greta Thunberg in that respect. In terms of our own journey through the encyclical, we firstly asked a colleague, Sister Anna Byrne, Daughter of Charity, to chart a pathway through the document for us, and in 4 weekly sessions we discussed the challenges to us as individuals and our understanding of the messages. We definitely benefited from discussing our different perspectives and listening to the views of others, aiding our own understanding and teasing out different interpretations. If I had to summarise, the key messages for me are 4 in number. 1, the fact that everything in the world is connected and all of us as living creatures are dependent on one another. The idea of integral ecology. Damage to the environment in turn damages people and communities, not only in the present but also for the future, the life chances of those yet to be born. And it is often the poor who suffer the most. We only have to think of the people of Pakistan who recently experienced devastating floods caused by climate change and not by any of their own actions. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are interlinked. Solutions and actions must involve both. The Pope says a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment. Secondly, the Pope gives us a message of hope. The belief that change can happen at individual and macro institutional or international level. As individuals, we can adopt a new lifestyle, one that is based on our consideration of the planet, its creatures, and our human family. At international level, new dialogue can be entered into regarding policy, showing a willingness to seek other ways of understanding progress and harmony. Pope Francis points to many positive examples of actions happening in countries which give us hope. And as I said, the encyclical ends with hope. Third, personal and community empowerment. We, each of us, can make a difference by the way we live our lives and the choices that we choose to make. Every purchasing decision is firstly a moral decision. For all our limitations, the Pope says, gestures of generosity, solidarity and care cannot but well up in us, since we were made for love. There is nobility in the duty to care for creation through daily actions. For example, using less heating, wearing jumpers, avoiding use of plastic, turning off unnecessary lights. Such action can restore our self-esteem and self-worth that can enable us to live more fully and feel that life on earth is worthwhile. And Pope Francis says, we must not think that these efforts will not benefit the world. They benefit society, for they call forth a goodness which inevitably tends to spread. And fourthly, as people of faith, our reason and motivation for change is compelling. Faith gives us the motivation to care for nature and for the most vulnerable of our brothers and sisters. Faith makes it incumbent that we think beyond ourselves. And as Pope Francis states, Christians realise their responsibility within creation. Their duty towards nature and the Creator are an essential part of their faith. Education is key to making explicit our faith obligations and considerations, causing a change in hearts and minds that will persist. And I know that Carmel intends to expand on this later, and Jerry will also explore how Laudato Si may provide the context for ethical capacity building in schools. I leave you with 3 quotations that I have selected from the document. In chapter 2, the New Zealand bishops asked what the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," means, when 20% of the world's population consume resources at a rate that robs the poor nations and future generations of what they need to survive. Chapter 5. We need to redefine our notion of progress, a technological and economic development which does not leave in its wake a better world and an integrally higher quality of life cannot be considered progress. And finally, believers must constantly feel challenged to live in a way consonant with their faith and not to contradict it by their actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for what was in fact a very comprehensive summary in many respects of a very, very important document. And of course, there are a number of themes running through the document, one of which, of course, is that Pope Francis is not afraid to say what he wants to say about planet Earth. But time and time again, there is reference to young people. And that's where we're going to turn our attention to now, because that gets us into the realm of educational settings, into the world of teaching, and of course into the world of the teaching profession. And therefore, I'm very happy, very pleased that Carmel has come along here and is going to offer her insights into how Laudato Si sits in the educational world. Over to Carmel.
Thank you, Peter. Pope Francis has said that a great cultural, spiritual and educational challenge stands before us, and it requires that we set out on the long path of renewal. And Anne-Marie has just said that the Pope asks us to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And I would add that we listen to the plea of our young people in our schools who are crying out for us as adults to prevent or limit the collapse of our ecosystems. The Pope refers to this as intergenerational solidarity. And against a backdrop of COVID, energy crisis, Ukraine, climate change, the growing gap between rich and poor, it is even more important that we are inspired to develop new ways of loving relationship with Jesus, rooted in ecological conversion, community, and the common good. My focus this morning is how Laudato Si can re-energise and enrich us in our vocation to be authentic witnesses to the gospel as we accompany our children and each other on our shared faith journey. And my central argument, however, is that this is not about radical change. It is about renewal and looking at what we do through Laudato Si lens, inspired by the gospel. And I am acutely conscious that teachers are doing Laudato Si inspired work every day, but have not maybe had an opportunity to reflect on it or embed it in the ecological spirituality and language indeed of Laudato Si. In the words of Richard Rohr, the famous Franciscan, the Spirit is continually at work in our lives, but we do not always recognise Him because God comes to us disguised as our lives. And Laudato Si comes to us disguised as our curriculum, our pastoral programme, our relationship, our values and ethos. And I just want to mention values very briefly, firstly. Indeed, we know that Laudato Si is grounded in Catholic social teaching, and our schools, like this Catholic University College, are rooted in the gospel values of respect, love, solidarity, truth and justice, all core values which permeate Laudato Si. And a recent publication delivering for communities, Catholic Schools Delivering for Communities, articulates the ethos and values of our schools with the goal of creating a better world, an ethos of care grounded in the core gospel values of faith, hope and love, shared values that promote community and contribute to the common good. This, the bedrock of our schools, and it is our evangelising mission, it is at the heart of Laudato Si. And at this time when our faith-based schools are under threat, I think it is even more important than ever that we can clearly articulate the case for our distinctive learning communities, grounded in Catholic social teaching and gospel values. And for example, the Master's programme here in St Mary's has a module on leaders in Catholic schools, which taps into the richness of Catholic social teaching and its vision of the human person and the importance of community and solidarity. And the new CCMS competence framework for principal and vice principal posts has made explicit under Catholic ethos the importance of faith development, promoting social and ecological justice and fostering the spiritual life of the whole community. So I want to share some practical ways in which our schools are promoting an integral ecological spirituality grounded in love of creation and each other. And this spirituality is about the head, the heart and the hands, a methodology which has played a key role in Catholic formation since Vatican II. And we know the head is the knowledge and skills taught through world around us and post-primary subjects such as geography, science, RE. But Laudato Si is also about the heart. As Anne-Marie said, praise be to you, calls on us to praise and honour God through our engagement with creation and an ecological spirituality attentive to God's presence in the world. In a recent message for the season of creation, Pope Francis, in his beautiful language, said, "Pray in the great cathedral of creation and revel in the grandiose cosmic choir of countless creatures all singing the praises of God." And many schools are doing this by creatively adapting their outdoor spaces to allow their children, in the words of Archbishop Farrell from Dublin, their children to embrace a spirituality that has greater contact with the natural world. And these spaces encompass nurture rooms, creative play areas, world around us areas, and sacred spaces in the classrooms where the natural world is celebrated. Thomas Berry, an American eco-theologian, reminds us that we will neither love nor save that which we do not experience as sacred. And I want to share with you an actual example of experiencing the world as sacred in a nursery environment not very far from here. Nursery school doing excellent work in this regard and shared with me by the principal, Mrs. Sarah Hunter, is Cathedral Nursery School in the Lower Falls, an area with multiple disadvantages, especially lack of safe outdoor play areas or gardens. And they redeveloped a section of their playground into a sensory garden with a mud kitchen and an allotment area. And each day the children spend at least 1 hour outdoors. And in Sarah's words, they dig, scrape, pull, push, squash, roll, mix, fill, experiment, investigate, weigh, share, negotiate, learn together and have fun. And they find and collect frogs, flowers, seeds, leaves, and observe the bees collecting nectar. They grow their own herbs and flowers and use them in their mud kitchen creations. They also grow vegetables, carrots, radishes, peas. And indeed, this is all linked in, of course, to the preschool curriculum, with interpersonal development and problem solving at the core. The staff have been empowered and enthused by pupils' curiosity, excitement, fun and involvement in messy, experimental and investigative play. And this is also a space where the parents, the grandparents and extended family members come to help with planting, harvesting and weeding in a true spirit of solidarity. And to see the faces of these children in awe and wonder and sharing a language of fraternity and beauty is indeed inspirational and certainly incorporates the head, the heart and the hands. I know also that one of the challenges our schools are facing in this post-COVID world is an increase in issues around mental health and well-being. And our young people are crying out for a renewed spirituality grounded in hope and a sense of moral purpose. And a pastoral strategy that's often recommended by external agencies is mindfulness. But many schools have adapted this into their creative prayer time to help their students calm down, find an inner peace and face the challenges of the day with a more positive mindset. And creative ways of praying used in our schools include meditative prayer, contemplation of nature, prayer walks, grace even before meals, prayer and craft, praying through art, poetry and music, and the daily examen, to name but a few. And there are many excellent prayer resources online for class use and assemblies. Well, having focused on the prayer life of the school, I now want to share some concrete examples of how our schools are caring for their common home and each other and promoting a balanced lifestyle in the spirit of Laudato Si. For example, walking to school initiatives, using public transport instead of private cars, planting trees, rewilding parts of the school grounds, cutting out single-use plastics, recycling, reducing paper usage, creative use of outdoor spaces, fruit and vegetable plots, window boxes, and the Eco Schools Green Flag Award, which many of our schools have achieved. And schools lucky enough to be getting additional investment, all stakeholders in these schools can use their influence to lobby for eco-friendly solutions. And we know that 5 of our dioceses have already divested from fossil fuels. One school in which Laudato Si is explicitly mentioned and promoted at whole school level is St John the Baptist Primary School, again not very far from here. And I quote their principal, Mr Donnelly. Pope Francis's encyclical has been the focal point for the teaching and learning of environmental themes, anchoring our need to care for the environment and one another centrally as part of our mission as educators in a Catholic school. And this is evidenced in many of their policies, their profile statements and the school environment. There is a strong focus in our schools on aesthetic education through poetry, art, dance, drama and music to counter sometimes what is an unbalanced focus on STEM in the post-primary curriculum. And I would also commend the vocational curriculum in post-primary education, where the work of our hands is given a higher profile. I also commend to you Trócaira's excellent resources encompassing games, videos, prayers, fact sheets, PowerPoints, with the focus clearly on both social and ecological justice. And one particularly helpful online resource to get someone started in this area is a Laudato Si animation called Laudato Si in 4 minutes, and it could be used with all age groups. And all our schools have a long tradition of generosity towards Trócaire, St Vincent de Paul and other charities. But many now, in the spirit of Laudato Si, are integrating their charitable endeavours with a broader, more hands-on approach to social and ecological justice. Post-16, I would like to mention, just before I finish, a new post-16 faith formation programme, CAFIS, developed by Mrs. Joan McComb and Dr. Aidan Donaldson. And this faith formation programme, based on the energy, vitality and vision that young adults possess, is influenced by Pope Francis and his call for a new evangelisation of missionary discipleship that speaks to the head, the heart and the hand. And the programme invites our post-16 students to engage in a faith journey that allows for a faith-filled relationship with God, self, others and the community. And in the programme there are modules on exploring our common humanity, caring for creation and hearing the cry of the poor. So in conclusion, I have tried to show briefly how Laudato Si is re-energising and reinvigorating teaching and learning in many of our schools through an enriched eco-spirituality, the pastoral care, the curriculum and the environment. And I reiterate that our distinctive Catholic identity and core values find eloquent expression in Laudato Si. So I trust that this seminar will help us to be more discerning about what we are doing to ensure that our vocation in our faith-based schools is grounded in a spirituality which provides meaningful opportunities to encounter Christ and each other in creation's sweet song of life and hope. And this is an inner peace for which we are all searching, and our young people and our school communities deserve no less. Thank you.
So Jerry, Carmel has set out a whole range of ways in which schools can bring the message of Laudato Si to the young people. You have worked for a long time with the General Teaching Council, which looks at professionalism and the values of the teaching profession. From your perspective, how do you see Laudato Si?
Well, I think, Peter, first of all, I think Anne-Marie and Carmel both mentioned that this is a beautiful document. And I'm very pleased to say that it is equally beautiful in the Irish language. Professor Padraig O'Féineachta, Monsignor Padraig O'Féineachta, translated Laudato Si into Irish, and it was the last thing he translated before he died. And I think somebody finished it off for him, but I think he died before it was finished. So, he regarded it as a very important endeavour to make this available in the language of the country. After 42 years of teaching, Peter, sometimes I think when you're in the classroom, sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. The immediacy of day-to-day work. I remember a former colleague of mine who we all know used to talk about in teaching your interruptions are interrupted. And teachers face many, many challenges, but after 42 years, basically most of it teaching, schools are deeply, deeply complex organisations. And sometimes I think when you're in school, you don't realise just how complex they are. And teaching is a deeply complex enterprise. And teachers need a framework with which to understand the enterprise that they're involved with. The deeply profound act of teaching and educating our children and young people. And I think Laudato Si provides a great counterbalance to many of the ills of the modern world, which both Carmel and Anne-Marie have talked about. You know, Laudato Si, as Anne-Marie mentioned, is deeply ecumenical. So this applies to teachers anywhere. It's not just about Catholic teachers. It's deeply countercultural. The Pope in Laudato Si is critical of post-industrial society. But he is also hopeful that the present generation will rise to the challenge to understand that we are in a role of stewards of the planet for future generations. And with the immediacy of day-to-day living and with the immediacy of the economic system within which we work and live, and which is based upon conspicuous consumption and immediate reward, it's very, very difficult to break that mindset. And Laudato Si, in my view, provides a framework, a counterbalance, both an intellectual counterbalance and a spiritual counterbalance and an emotional counterbalance to the problems that beset humanity at the present time. Pope Francis talks about the need for educators to be capable of developing an ethics of ecology. And this is, I think, where, we need to reconfigure teaching and teacher professionalism. Now, teachers are deeply ethical and moral people. But in the day-to-day routine business of teaching, I don't think teachers realise just how many profound ethical decisions they make. And it's by bringing the ethical dimension of our profession to the fore, I believe will give teachers confidence, will empower teachers to engage with the problems of the modern world and the modern classroom. The modern world is characterised by anomie, normlessness. Pope Francis talks about rapidification, so much social change so quickly, and this is impacting on schools, it's impacting on pupils, it's impacting on teachers. We haven't seen anything yet in terms of rapidification. Think, for example, of artificial intelligence. What way is the profession, what way are schools going to deal with artificial intelligence? What are the implications of artificial intelligence for teaching and learning, for the profession itself? Laudato Si opens a new vista to enable us to see more deeply the way forward within the constraints of the powers that we have as educators within the education system. When you think of the alienation experienced, in the world today, the sort of sense of powerlessness, meaninglessness, isolation and self-estrangement, I think Laudato Si provides a great counterbalance to all of that and provides teachers with a perspective which is deep and enriching. So I know that the Department of Education and educators at the present time are looking at developing a new set of teaching and leadership competences, and under the title of the leadership lens and leadership competences. And this document under development is firmly grounded in values and ethics. And I think this provides an opportunity for the teaching profession to empower itself, to see itself as an ethical profession, to build ethical capacity within schools, to build their own personal ethical capacity, to face the challenges ahead and to provide meaning and purpose to what we do. And this can be underpinned profoundly by what has been called the love poem of Laudato Si.
Your point about the reprofessionalisation of teaching is very well made, because many teachers in a very, very crowded curriculum, in a very crowded and busy world, do question sometimes the very purpose of what it is they do. But you're making an argument that this wonderful document, Laudato Si, can, in a sense, give them the new power that they need in a rapidly changing world.
I think one of the things that Laudato Si challenges is utilitarianism and instrumentalism and technocracy. And it is a challenge to the dominant ideology of managerialism, which has a negative impact on the enterprise of education as educators and teachers understand it. And there is a move now towards, in my view, a return to virtue ethics. The virtue ethics that go back as far as Aristotle, that Thomas Aquinas emphasised, and most recently have been articulated very strongly by Alistair MacIntyre in his seminal work After Virtue. And teachers and teaching and schools fundamentally based on virtue ethics with a high capacity for ethical thinking, ethical decision making, and particularly ethical sensitivity, can have nothing other than a positive impact. And Laudato Si is a cornucopia of ideas to help that develop.
And a big impact on the teaching profession, I happen to say. Could I bring Anne-Marie back in again? Anne-Marie, you were dealing with some of the really big issues that the Pope is outlining in this encyclical. I have a report here from the World Bank, and there's a statement I want to read, and I'm going to ask you for your perception or your views on it. Climate change, poverty and inequality are the defining issues of our age. And you spoke about that. Tackling climate change will require major social, economic and technological changes, many of which are costly and will require large investments. I suppose the practical question I'm asking you is, where is the funding going to come for those large investments to make the sort of change that is inherent to what we're speaking about, but also has been defined by the World Bank?
Well, as you would imagine, Peter, there's many problems that need to be sorted out and financed, but it is a question of prioritisation. Where do we prioritise our funding? And my question is, can we afford not to deal with this? Because the problems are multiplying as we speak. Jerry talks about repetification. Technology knows no bounds. It is ramping ahead. The problems that it's leaving in its wake will have to be dealt with at some stage. So if we don't deal with them now, it's like a stitch in time saves nine in a way. We are only multiplying the problem. We could see mass migrations of people who can no longer feed themselves across international boundaries. We could see competition for resources. We could see prices escalating. We could see the health of our people deteriorating. We also know the health service at the moment is in need of money, but with deteriorating health due to pollution, due to mental health issues, that can only rise. So we need to get real, we need to grasp the problem, and we need to prioritise these issues and prioritise the funding we need.
You make your points very, very well, Anne-Marie. I'm going to go back now, Carmel. Education is so much part of our conversation here today. But after all the experience you have had of education, what impact can education actually have on these huge issues? The one of which is in front of us, climate change and biodiversity. I'm talking here about the big picture. What can education do for our society in the face of some of the challenges that we've heard about this morning?
Well, Pope Francis has said that education is about sowing seeds, and that's what we do in schools, to use that analogy, sowing seeds. Secondly, we have a responsibility as educators to ensure our young people are informed citizens. So there's the head, the knowledge. But in our faith-based schools, we go beyond that into the prayer life of the school, the heart, and of course then the hands, that they will go out into the world and be practical, proactive in trying to reduce the impact of climate change and to change the world. So we talk a lot in schools about, and you've referred to it, Jerry, in terms of ethics, but also the core values, the common good. the responsibility to look out for each other. And that's an integral part of all our schools, our ethos, our culture. We look out for each other to respect, to love. And now in many schools, that's being enriched by a focus on the care for creation and how that will prepare our young people to be more active and better informed citizens as we face the many challenges that have been alluded to this morning.
In your presentation, you made reference to this being a long-term problem. In a sense, you're saying that education is a long-term solution, and we can't expect solutions tomorrow morning. But if we invest in education, we're investing in a solution as time moves on.
Well, I think it's both short-term and long-term, you're right, in terms of changing minds and hearts. But there are, in the short term, many changes that are happening in our schools. I mean, I referred to the school in the Lower Falls, which are having an immediate impact, not just on the children, but also on the community served by that school, the parents, the grandparents, and the teachers, indeed, the adults, and all the other staff who work in the schools. So we cannot forget the short-term impact as well as, of course, the long-term impact.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Jerry for one moment here in a very practical sense. I'm relatively new to my understanding of Laudato Si, but I'm not new to our understanding of Trócaire. So I'm questioning, where do these two, let's say, organisations or two views about development coalesce? Where do they come together? Can you maybe inform me of this?
Yeah, well, you know, Peter, the Trócaire in Irish means mercy. And one of the sentiments of Laudato Si is mercy for the planet, you know, to help the planet. So, you know, Laudato Si complements Trócaire. Trócaire is a charity organisation with a profound reputation for the good works that it does. And I know Trócaire has one of its goals as social justice. And social justice permeates the whole of Laudato Si. John Rawls, the eminent jurist and philosopher, talks about justice as fairness. Trócaire, in my understanding, through its own name, translated means mercy, which sits very, very comfortably with justice as fairness. And that sits very, very comfortably with the very profound philosophy that's set out in Laudato Si.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, and back to yourself again here. And it's for an insight into your view on the extent to which people in Ireland, Britain, Europe, indeed further afield, really understand at this moment in time the pressure that the planet's under. So recently I read an article about the fact that the glaciers are melting in Switzerland, and that will have an impact upon water supply in numerous European countries. To what extent do you think people understand that it's part of their everyday knowledge? Do we have to work even harder in raising the public profile of the challenges in front of us?
I think we have to work really hard, and I think that at the moment, such as the pace of change, the pace of life, that a lot of people are working extremely hard just to exist, and they have very little time or energy to give to other enterprises. And I think there is some understanding. It would be unfair to say there's no understanding. I think there are groups, and the Pope Francis points to certain civic groups and organisations that are raising awareness of this issue. But we need more, and he talks about this, the need for education, the need to meet in small communities, through parishes, through the church, through whatever groups, to increase our knowledge and understanding, not only of what is happening in our locality, but the impact that that can have upon other places, and the impact ultimately it will have on people's lives and on the lives of the poor. For example, if water supplies are used up, we need to maybe buy bottled water. The people that can least afford the bottled water are people who are living on very small incomes. So again, it's back to the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor. And the time is now. If COVID has taught us anything, COVID has taught us to stop and think, how are we living our lives? How do we choose to live our lives? And during that time, we found great joy in just meeting each other. We found great joy in the simple things of life. And as the Pope says, we need to go back to a more simple life. And he actually advocates a sobriety. Less is more. We've got used to having whatever we want when we want, at an individual level. We've got to get out of that mindset. We have got to raise the equality of others, help others, and in doing that, enrich ourselves. It is an enriching thing.
Thank you. Carmel, reference was made there to the earth crying. And certainly the earth is crying in Pakistan and it's crying in the Horn of Africa. How do you feel today that young people are responding to this? Leaving aside the formal education that goes on in schools or universities, but the new generation of people who are going to be the leaders of the future, what's your understanding of their disposition to climate change and to all the implications it has for our lives?
In my experience, Peter, our young people are most receptive to helping others. They have a generosity of heart which is inspirational in many cases in terms of initiatives in schools like Trócaire or St Vincent de Paul, but they need guided and directed, and they need to see the big picture. Perhaps sometimes the flaw, if you like, in some fundraising has been a narrow focus that has not contextualised the challenges in terms of a world, a global scale. And that's why the work of Trócaire is so commendable, because they are looking at social and ecological justice, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. But I do think our young people are inspirational given proper guidance and direction. And in the world today with social media and so on, they are very conscious of the challenges. I mean, we're bombarded with them every day, the energy crisis and so on. And they are crying out for leadership. And we are, as Catholic educators, leaders in our societies, in our schools. We have such power in our classrooms. And we are leaders who can support them in this endeavour. And as we alluded to earlier, intergenerational solidarity. We owe it to the next generation of children who are sitting in front of us and our grandchildren and their children to leave a better world than the one that exists at present.
Could I just build upon just what Carmel has said there, Peter, is one of the things I think that causes the disconnect when young people look at people like us and they say they're talking the talk, yes, but they're not walking the walk. Right. They talk about people saving or changing to public transport. There I see a line of cars with one person in it coming into cities, blocking up cities. They talk about saving energy, yet their lamps they have lamps in all their homes, not only a central light, they've maybe 4 lights in a living room. So we need to model the behaviour. So the young people have the energy, the young people have the commitment. They look to us for the action so that they can see that we are living by our actions. And I think that's where the disconnect may come. And Greta Thunberg herself, who challenged President Trump and who's challenged many of the leaders of the world, the young people recognise that, but we need to live authentically if we are to pass on values to young people and show them that there is a different way.
This discussion has been in the context of the Teaching Profession Project at St Mary's. So we'll conclude by asking each of you for your final message to teachers who might be watching this. As professional teachers, what do you feel is the best they can do for our young people in the context of the climate and the biodiversity crisis that we face? So Jerry, I'll start with you. What's your message to teachers?
Well, teachers, I think, have to acknowledge and recognise that the work that they do is deeply ethical. They are role models, and they are also lead intellectuals within their communities. And they can have a profound impact on the pupils they teach, an impact that can last for many, many years. We all meet pupils that we taught 10, 20, 30 years ago, and it is the most gratifying feeling when they tell you that you had an impact on them, a positive impact on them. So by bringing this agenda and this sensibility to the classroom, framed around the sentiments in Laudato Si, I think teachers can make a very significant and profound impact on the pupils they teach, which will last a lifetime.
Jerry's covered a lot of stuff there, Anne-Marie, and he's left my two other guests, I suppose, grappling with what's next. So maybe something very specific or something that's very close to your own heart in the context of what Jerry has told us.
Well, I would want teachers to give the children and the young people in their care the joy of hope that change can happen. They have a huge power within themselves to not only change their lives, but change politicians, change the lives of others, and never underestimate what any one individual can do.
Joy of hope. That's a beautiful phrase. And Carmel, the last word goes to you.
Thank you.
What's your message to teachers watching this programme?
Well, my message is twofold. Firstly, they are doing inspired Laudato Si work, but they're not, I'm sure, calling it Laudato Si every day. But in their creative prayer life and in the many opportunities they have to focus on care of creation, they're doing inspired work. My second core message aligned to that is to remember the head, the heart and the hands. It's not just about the facts and the knowledge and the head through our curriculum and so on. It's so much more. It's about the heart, loving creation, giving them chances to respect and care for creation. And it's also about the hands, being practical, writing to their politicians. There are so many different ways. They are active citizens and encouraging them to engage in active citizenship and leadership because they are the leaders of the future. So we do depend on them. They depend on us, but we're interdependent. We are also depending on them to create a better world with us.
Thank you to Carmel.
Peter.
Thank you to Anne-Marie. Thank me to yourself as well for the insights you have given us here at this discussion, which is set in the context of the Teaching Profession Project. And I'm very grateful for the contribution that you have made to that. Thank you. Thank you.